Hey, everybody, welcome to another special episode of the Fantasy Fiends podcast. We are here to talk about badass heroines, and we've collected an assortment of pretty badass heroines and manly author types as well. So welcome all of my guests. Why don't we start by going around and introducing each other? Angel, why don't you kick it off for us?
Oh, beautiful.
I'll throw you in the deep end.
I see that.
All of my guests, why don't we start?
Oh, it's got a delay. Okay. I'm Angel, Angel Hayes, epic fantasy author. Nothing's out yet, but it's all in the works. The free story is on the website, but I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about all these other awesome authors.
Awesome. Dorothy.
I'm Dorothy Dreyer. I am the author of the Curse of the Phoenix series right here. Phoenix Descending and Paragon Rising. I do write in other genres, but this one has been definitely the most fun so far.
Awesome. Miranda.
Hi, I'm Miranda Honfleur, and I write romantic epic fantasy. This is the first book of my series, and fantasy romance.
Very cool. Garrett.
Hey, I'm Garrett Robinson. I write the books of Underrealm. The first book in my series is Nightblade, as you can see right there. And it's the first book in the Nightblade Epic, which is a series that's got 6 books out so far. And I've got 3 other series set in the same world.
Wow, for those of you who are listening and not watching, Garrett's clearly done this before because Stevie and I spent the entire last episode saying, oh, if we could figure out how to screen share, this would be awesome. But Garrett, he knows his business. Rob, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I'm Rob Hayes. I'm an author of epic fantasy and dark fantasy, and I got a whole load of books. You might know me from, last year's Spiffbo. I kind of won the thing. Anyway, because my latest release
he says so humbly.
I'm very humble. And yeah, my latest release is Never Die. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And finally, TL.
I'm TL Branson. You can call me Trevor. That's my first name, actually. A lot of people want to know what that is, and so that's what it is, Trevor. That's what the T in the TL stands for. I am an author of YA fantasy. I have written the Soul Render series, which we've talking about, or Soul Stones series, book 1, Soul Render. And our heroine is on the cover of book 2, Soul Shade. And glad to be here today.
Very cool. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you what the TL stands for. I was going to go with something more like Thessalonius or something, but Trevor, just great. So, I guess the number one question is, who is your badass heroine? Why don't anybody tell us a little bit about the heroine that you feel is the paragon of badassery in your stories?
Well, sure. So my first heroine I created was Lauren. She is a girl who grew up in an abusive family in the forest, and flees in the very first, few chapters of the book. It's not a spoiler. To go on a quest to become the world's greatest thief. She actively wants to become the world's greatest thief because she grew up hearing stories of a Robin Hood like character from the world's history in the books, and so she kind of goes and actively pursues that. And one finds out that the law doesn't actually like it when you do that, and 2, most people who go out in the world to become criminals are not actually great people. So she ends up kind of being chased by literally everyone. And through a series of lucky events and events that don't seem to be quite so lucky, winds up kind of almost getting what she wants, but not really. And it's fun. It's an interesting journey.
That's interesting. So what makes her badass?
She is, well, first of all, she's extremely physically capable. So in just the first couple of chapters, she meets this wizard, and he's a noble-born wizard. He's very obviously cultured, and he's got magic. And he startles her at first because she doesn't know he's a wizard. So he almost roasts her with fire, but then he turns it aside at the last second. And then she just promptly puts him right on his ass. And she keeps running into people in her journeys who are just like, well, and she puts them right on her ass. And she also, one thing that I really like about her, which most people wouldn't necessarily associate with being badass, but which I really admire in her, which sounds egotistical because I created her, but whatever, is that she is a hardcore pacifist, and she maintains that pretty much no matter what. She'll again put someone on their ass, but she won't kill, and she holds to that no matter how many people are like, you're the only person who's going to follow that rule. And she says, right, but I am going to follow it. So I like those two things about her. She's not educated. She never even learned how to read. She has to have other people like read road signs for her and maps and everything like that. But she knows what she's good at, and she uses that to her advantage.
Very cool. Now, Miranda, I would like you to go next, because that picture, that cover of Blade and Rose, is one of the coolest covers that I've seen in a couple of years. So tell us about that awesome sword fighting looking girl.
Well, Riel is an elemental mage, so she can use all 4 elements, which is rather unusual in the world of Blade and Rose. But what actually makes her badass are her flaws. So she kind of leads with her heart, and when she feels something is wrong, she can't help but step in. And so that's her other flaw, recklessness. So she ends up charging in, and whenever she thinks something is wrong, she has to fix it. And of course, that leads to problems. So really her choices just drive the plot, whether they're good choices or bad choices. And of course, she ends up being badass in the process.
Man, running into fixed problems. Boy, does that sound familiar to me. Rob, Never Die. It was set from the perspective of Itami Cho, is her name?
Yes, that's correct.
And tell us a little bit about her.
She's a shinte, which is sort of the world's version of a samurai. And she's a character who the thing about the shinte is they swear oaths, so they're constantly sort of like swearing an oath to protect a person or to kill a person or whatever they're doing. But she's a shinte who has a history of never actually keeping any of her oaths. She fails them all. And then the very first chapter of the book, she dies. That's not a spoiler. It's right there on the back in the blurb. But yeah, she dies, and then she's brought back to life and given a second chance to try and fulfill her oaths, basically.
Very cool. Dorothy.
My main character, Tori, is actually, she starts out as a small, I don't want to say town because she lives in the forest, a small forest-dwelling, humble girl who is just trying to save her family from a fatal disease, phoenix fever. And the only way she can do that is by collecting a very rare plant that happens to be in a something called the Rift, where zombies are. So she has to fight the zombies in order to get the plant, in order to save her family. But she knows there's a cure out there somewhere. And so she goes out to steal the cure. And when she gets caught, the person who catches her makes a deal with her that he will give her the cure for her family if she does these specific deeds for him, specifically infiltrating a queendom and carrying out other tasks.
Interesting. So her badass, or her defining trait is this drive to save her family.
Exactly, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Trevor, what about you?
Well, I write YA fantasy, so if you know anything about YA fantasy, it's a predominantly female-dominated market. It is known for its female heroines and its strong females in the genre. And so while reading that genre, I actually didn't see very many male-led books. And so my first book starts out with a male lead, but it includes pretty much every single woman in my series is a strong female to one degree or another. I include at least 4 or 5 different ones that I consider main key characters. It's hard to talk about any of them without really spoiling, but I'll talk about the main one, which is on the cover of book 2. And even then, it's going to be a bit spoilerish, so sorry for anybody who is watching. Angel has been really great in all of the communication on Indie Fantasy Addicts to call her Red, which is the nickname that my main character gives her in the story. It's just the term that he uses because she wears a red cloak, but she's kind of like a rogue character at the beginning. She's very mysterious. You don't really know what her motivations are. She's very snappy, very witty. She has a lot of sass to her. And she also is very capable, as Garrett had mentioned. That's one of the things that she can do. She doesn't need somebody to take care of her. And our main character, the main male character anyway, in the story, wants to sort of protect her and take care of her. And she rebuffs him and says that she doesn't need any of that. Later on in the story, it is revealed that she's actually a very prominent figure, a very important person throughout the entire kingdom, and she also runs a rebel organization, and she is the mastermind behind all of that. And so she also has wit to go along with her brawn as well. And she, in book 2, goes on to be the central figure, the point where instead of following through like a lot of series and following just one person, each of my books tends to focus on a different person and tell their story. So book 2 really highlights her more than book 1, but it's hard to start with a book 2, so that's why we picked book 1.
Very cool. Angel, do you have anything you would like to talk about?
I gotta say about Red, she is like a little Selena Sardathian. That's what I compare her to, because she's got that attitude, she's got the skills and everything. She's just amazing.
That's awesome. Now, I want to ask all of you authors. I know what my favorite traits for my heroines are, which I will bring up, afterward. But what is your favorite trait to give your female characters? Like, what makes you look at them and say, all right, now this is the characteristic that I want my character to model?
I like a sense of humor personally. That's really, really important to me. It's always like somewhat makes me nervous to say this, but I don't personally care for dark fantasy. It's fine for other people to like it. Every time I say it, people are like, "What's wrong with that?" Nothing's wrong with it. It's wonderful. But I really, really like, not dark fantasy, and so. The more sense of humor characters can have, and the more fun they can have, even in like really dark moments, is something that I really love. There will be life and death situations where somebody still cracks a joke, or a funny situation happens that doesn't necessarily play off of a joke. That tension breaker is one of my favorite things to put in my own books and to read in other people's books. So all of my badass heroines, because I have them in other series and other stories as well, always have that sense of humor that will bring you back out of things getting too heavy and too depressing.
I like it. Who's next?
Well, I'll say again that a very deep flaw is where I like to start with my heroines, because I love the external battles. I love stuff exploding and giant battles. But I also love seeing a heroine really fight her inner demons. And that's something really relatable to every reader. So even while a heroine's just kicking butt across the continent and just blowing up everything, you can still look at her deep flaw and say, I relate to that. I can sympathize with that. And seeing her overcome that, that's just another layer of heroism.
Do you have a specific flaw or like a flaw family that you like to play around in?
Well, I don't like interview flaws, like, my hair is too curly. I like to dig deep. So it's like someone who's really self-centered and needs to learn to overcome that, or someone who's extremely timid and has to find her courage. Things of that nature that you can't just, fix or say, oh, it's not a real flaw.
I like that.
I'd say for my heroines, my key thing that I look for in them is exactly what I put in my character, and that's a bit of sass. And it actually hits on both of what Garrett and Miranda were saying, in that sass brings a lot of humor into the story oftentimes, but at the same time, it can be a character flaw because they're a little too over the top, they're a little too self-centered, and so they have to work through that. They have to learn to get along with other characters a little bit better, and so it provides both of those dynamics, and I really like that aspect in a heroine.
I don't know if it's a trait, but I do like when my characters have to really struggle with the concept of right and wrong. I mean, of course, they know they should be doing right, but if there's something there, some element that's preventing them from doing the right thing, maybe it's something selfish or something internal, or I don't want to say a love cliche, but I think that can give a good trait to a character.
Interesting. Rob, what about you?
I like giving my strong female characters the heroine sort of a bit of compassion, because I think there's a tendency in fantasy when writing a badass heroine to actually make them almost detached from a lot of what's going on around them. They tend to be quite hard, and especially the sort of like the heroines who are quite militaristic or warriors. They tend to feel quite detached from all the violence and everything that's going on around them. So I quite like giving them a bit of compassion that makes them feel a bit more human than I feel some of them sometimes appear.
You like a Katniss Everdeen type character who goes to the hospitals and is seeing all the sick and injured people and that sort of thing?
I would assume so, though. I must admit, I've never actually read or watched a Hunger Games book or film.
That's fine. They're good books. I think for me, the one trait that I admire most in people like my wife is like just the fact that they keep going no matter what. It's one of the scenes that stood out to me the most in any movie was in Love Actually, where Emma Thompson's character just found out that her husband might be cheating on her, and she goes and she cries in her room, and then as soon as she comes out to see her kids, she's just right back in mother mode, and she like hides that thing, the fact that she's crying. And so it's just this willpower, this drive to keep going, to keep being the mother, the wife, all of these things, this strength of character, determination. And so this character that I've written, her name's Issa. It's her story. The book opens, the series opens on her story, and it's like, I've trained for this day for so many years. I'm gonna make it no matter what. And I really like that determination, persistence, and grit in my characters. And that for me is the thing that I admire most in female and of course male characters as well, is when no matter how bad things get, they keep fighting, keep pushing through.
I like that. I also love giving characters, and like you said, it goes for heroines and heroes and any character as well. But I always try to find a weird thing that the character can be really good at. Not even necessarily weird, but just something unusual. Like, yes, okay, so maybe they're a really cool fighter. That's great. But Lauren in particular, her one thing that she does better than anybody she's ever met, and multiple people note that this is true, is she is a perfect liar. You absolutely cannot tell when she's lying. She meets this really incredibly powerful, charismatic merchant who's just an extremely strong personality. And the merchant asks her a question that she already knows the answer to, and Lauren lies. And the merchant is shocked, because she's like, I know you're lying, because I know the truth, and I know that you know the truth, but I can't see it in your face, and I can always see it in the person's face. And then on the other side, my second series with a badass heroine, she is that consummate warrior. She's incredibly good at that. But that aside, physical capability aside, she brews the best beer that anybody's ever tasted. Like, people travel across kingdoms to get her beer, and something just weird like that one lets you do some cool research on, like, so how do you brew the best beer? Like, what is the best beer? And then also is just something that it can come up in weird ways. I love things like that just make it a little less, I don't want to say carbon copy, but a little more unique, a little more bringing something that a reader probably hasn't seen in one of their favorite heroines before.
That little moment of humanity, like one of the best ones is the big, strong, thug looking guy who's also an intellectual.
Yeah,
or just these things that they sort of defy the trope or the expectations. One of my favorite ones is one of my heroines, Alana. She collects these little hawk figurines for her son, right? Yeah. And of course, it's this sentimental thing, but it ends up that she ends up killing someone with this little hawk figurine. It's like you said, it comes into the story in weird ways, but it's really fun to throw those things in, because it does give people something, this moment of humanity to connect to. Hey, I like cooking too. I like beer, beer brewing as well. It really gives them a connection to the character.
Exactly.
Actually, circling back to Andy's point about trying again. I don't know how many of you have seen Captain Marvel yet, but that was actually a huge theme, is that part of being human, and it's not weakness, it's strength, is that you fall down, but you get back up. And resilience is just one of those things that are so common in heroines.
Did you hear that interview about the difference between Carol getting back up and Captain America getting back up? One of the filmmakers was interviewed, and he said basically, yeah, you know, that's one trait about Carol Danvers, the Captain Marvel. She falls down and she gets back up, and that's actually very much like Captain America. The difference is Captain America gets back up because it's the right thing to do. Carol gets back up because F you. And I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah. Well, it was actually, you know, I watched it last night, and I was, you know, reading some Easter eggs and spoilers and reviews and stuff like that. And it was interesting how it was like all of these things that I didn't catch. They were included subtly, like the fact that because they were women, they couldn't fly the military missions. I didn't think about that until I was reading this, and I was like, so that's one huge factor that drove her to becoming so good in the way she did, was the fact that, you know, she had to fight this, and then of course her whole history with her family, things like that. It was subtle, so it wasn't like punching you in the face, but I thought it was really well done.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me ask you this: who is the most badass heroine in your own life, real life?
Oh no.
Told you I was going to ask some questions.
Okay. Before anyone else says it, I'm going to say it. My mom.
I almost said my mom.
She came to America as a political refugee, and you know, my dad was an alcoholic and abusive, and she ended up divorcing him, raising me by herself, putting me through school. Like, this lady, my mom is definitely a super heroine.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I have to go with the easy answer. That's my wife, but I also am just I have a lot of incredible women as friends who I just admire and respect. And I've gotten to work with some of them since I started writing. I got to work with some of them in my previous life as a filmmaker, and they're just, I mean, oh God, there's quite a few of them. Although my wife is definitely the person who has been the most badass heroine to me personally, you know what I mean? As you know, the others sort of more in a general sense, but boy, you know, she's my business partner. She handles all of the business side of our publishing company. She does marketing all day. Together we take care of our 3 kids. She manages the household, she manages our finances, and she's just still my best friend and the hottest lady I've ever seen. She's just fantastic.
Is she either listening or going to watch this later?
I hope she is.
Earning lots of points.
Otherwise, why, you know, like I could have cut it off about halfway through. I was going for extra credit.
Yeah, I'm going to have to say the same. My wife's not going to watch this, so it's genuine because she's not going to find out that I'm saying this. But there have been times, especially in the last couple of weeks. So last week I was hauling serious ass to get a book done, and there were a couple of days where she starts work at 6 o'clock in the morning. She's off by 2, but then she goes at 2, picks up the kids from school, comes home, takes one. One had to go to the hospital. She had to go pick up one, drop another off, and it was like 9 o'clock at night by the time she got home, all without complaining. And I was just like I was in awe of that, because if it was me, I would have been complaining the shit out of it. but just some of the things she does, like tomorrow she's got an entire afternoon from 2 o'clock to like 6:30 of school meetings for the 3 kids, and she's just gonna do it. And it's just amazing how much she does sometimes.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a heroine they want to talk about?
Sure. I guess I could share a story that it actually is from my wife's grandmother. So I don't know a whole lot about her. She actually lives in London, and I live in San Diego. She came out for our wedding. I met her briefly then, and we were just out in London in December, and got to see her again. But most of what I know from her is stories, and my wife told me a story about how they talked to her one morning. They said, "Oh, it was 10 a.m. What have you been doing this morning, Grandma?" And she's, well, at the time was like 88, 89 years old. She's in her 90s now. But and then she said, "Oh, I just, I took the mattress down from the upstairs bedroom and took it down to the dump." And my wife's father said, "How did you do that? How did you fit it down the stairs?" Because it was a tight fit. And she said, "Oh, I went and got a saw and sawed it in half and carried it out there." And it's just like, what? This 89-year-old woman is sawing a mattress in half and hauling it down the stairs and throwing it in the dump. What are you doing?
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
I guess I
Anybody
can
else?
add a twist
Yeah,
on
go ahead.
that. Instead of, I mean, I would normally, of course, say my mother, but maybe I should mention my daughter as pretty badass. This goes along the lines of being resilient, because she suffered through bullying in school and struggled with her, that made her schoolwork suffer. And then that led to depression. And she has also an autoimmune disease, and she suffers from panic attacks. But even though she does have her lows, she just picks herself back up and she keeps on going. And so I think that's pretty badass of her.
Very cool. Now here's a question that I've been asked a few times that I'd like to pass on. Are there any elements of the women in your life, or for you lady authors, that of yourself that you have written into your characters, like things that you've seen other people in your life or that you've seen and you really respect that and you wanted to bring that into your characters?
I think there has to be, doesn't there? I mean, personally, I think a lot of my sisters went into the character in my book City of Kings, Rose. She's a woman in control of an empire, trying to keep the empire together and take over the last of the kingdom that's still holding out. And she's also heavily pregnant, and everything that she does in the book, she's doing because she wants to build a better world for her daughter. She assumes she's having a daughter. She doesn't actually know for certain. She assumes it, but she wants to make the world a better place so that her daughter doesn't have to go through the same things that she did, the same hardships that she did. And I think I took a lot from my sisters. They're both mothers now, and you can see the love that they have for their children and wanting not only the world to be a better place for their children, but wanting their children to really find their own way in the world as well.
Well, I would say that I try to write a part of myself into every character. Maybe this is a offshoot of write what you know, but it's a little easier to relate to a character you're writing when you've experienced what they're going through. So it might be something like an uncompromising sense of honor, or crippling insecurity, or razor sharp wit. But yeah, it's not just limited to the female characters, but the male characters too.
Yeah, I think that the one specific example I can think of, there's some more general ones, but my character Mag, who comes up later in the Nightblade series, and then has her own not spin-off series but parallel series that starts after that. My wife's name is Meg and this character's name is Mag, and they're not actually very similar to each other at all, except that the one thing that Mag has that's completely my wife is overwhelming compassion, almost to a fault. Like, she cares so much about other people that it becomes everything to her, and she'll do all sorts of crazy things and sacrifice all sorts of things for for her own personal comfort and her own personal safety, for other people, even just to help them out, not just when it's life and death, but if they're in trouble, if they're not doing as well as they should be. That is something that I just kind of directly just pulled out and stuck right in Mag's personality.
Very cool. Tia, what about you?
For me, it would probably be the ability to recognize when you make mistakes and to be willing to admit that you made a mistake within yourself and fix that. I would say that in just about all of my books, regardless of whether it's a hero or heroine, at the beginning of the book, the character starts out with a particular challenge or a particular obstacle, and they generally fail in that obstacle, and quite miserably so. And later on in the book, the obstacle presents itself again, sometimes in the same exact form, and they recognize it immediately and say, I want to do better this time. Other times it's a similar situation or scenario that has echoes, and the character can reflect on this and say, no, I'm going down that wrong road again. I need to stop. I'm going to fix this. I'm not going to make that mistake again. And that would be the characteristic that I see most in my heroine, is that she is strong, but she's willing to admit when she's wrong, and she wants to correct that.
That's interesting. I just wrote my wife. I've written my wife into various scenes throughout my books in pieces, but the last one that I wrote, she has this saying where she says the fist of iron in the velvet glove. Or she says that I'm the head and she's the neck. So she basically controls me, or she puts ideas in my head and makes me think they're mine. So I wrote this guy's like, this warlord is the most powerful warlord on the continent. And yet he's like, yeah, my wife says the same thing about me. She's like that. I thought it was really funny to have these kind of, these super powerful men with the wife basically controlling them. Angel, you had some questions.
Oh, sorry. I do. What would you say to people that saying having a badass heroine as a main character means that it was written for women?
I mean, it really depends on the gaze, right? Like you as an author think about the ideal reader you're writing for. And sure, other people might like it, but if I'm writing for a 20-something woman who's struggling to find her career, right? Or her place in the world, I hope that demographic enjoys it, but it doesn't mean others can't. Kind of like how J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter for her kids, right? And so much of the world has read Harry Potter and loved it.
Right. Yeah, I think that you can certainly write women for women, and I think that's a thing that should be done. But I think that saying that is the automatic default is this. I mean, you just don't say that for male characters. You don't say that for men. You don't. Everybody is supposed to be able to relate to Luke Skywalker, but apparently Rey is only for when. No, it's no. I don't even bother having that argument with people anymore, because it's just, it's so, yeah, I think it's dumb.
Well, maybe the flip side of that too is maybe Luke Skywalker isn't relatable to everyone.
Yeah,
like,
no, that
maybe
could
a lot of women don't relate.
Yeah, that could be.
It's interesting to see this comes up all the time, I feel like, in the two fantasy groups that we run. As far as the demographics for certain genres or subgenres within fantasy as well. We have a massively successful YA fantasy group with over 12,000 members, and looking at the demographic of it, 98% of them, 98% are women. And that is because YA fantasy, again, as I mentioned earlier, is a predominantly female author genre, as well as a female main character group. And then you go to mainstream fantasy, and I feel like it's now there are female authors, but it's predominantly run by men. When you think of people like Brandon Sanderson and R.A. Salvatore and Terry Brooks, and you can go on and on and on. And yes, some of them have female leads as well. I know Brandon Sanderson's newest book, Skyward, just came out with a female lead. But I feel like a lot of those times they're men writing men, and so oftentimes men enjoy them. And it doesn't mean that they're not for one, isn't for the other. But I do see the two camps being split quite frequently, and it comes up a lot in discussion.
Yeah, I will say that I have struggled with female-driven fantasy, especially the early 2000s and late 90s. Things have changed a lot in the last 5 years. Since 2010, fantasy has grown massively. But during that time, during the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s, the female-driven fantasy tend to focus a lot more on the female-centric issues, things that a lot of men have a harder time relating to, just like women might not have an easy time relating to a guy struggling to control his hormone-driven aggression. You know, it's just not something that a lot of women would relate to. Maybe there are, I don't know. But so the issues that a lot of those characters faced were not everyman issues or issues that men would relate to. Nowadays, it's much more open because authors, both male and female authors, are finding issues that everyone can relate to. Things like identity, or what your religious convictions, all these things that are far less male centric and female centric, and across the board we're all struggling with them. So it makes it much more human as opposed to a female lead or a male lead. There's no more or there's less of that division.
Because there was the idea always that male, especially in traditional publishing, which, I mean, let's face it, like back then, self-publishing basically didn't exist. But there was the idea in traditional publishing that male was default, and so if you were going to have a female lead, it was going to be because you were going to be dealing with women's issues. Like, why else would you have a female lead? There's no other reason to have one. And it's like. Yeah, and I'm very glad that we're moving beyond that mindset. It's fantastic.
Were there any books in particular in the 90s and 2000s? Because I remember that time period as being like a really Mercedes lackey dominated time period for me. And I don't know, I related to those books, but was that a different experience for you, Andy?
I will say the one female character that really got me was Paxenarian.
Oh my God, I was going to say the deed of Paxenarian.
It's just so good. Like I said, it's just these everyman struggles. Yes, there is very much the woman in the man dominated world, which is something that was common in all fantasy and still exists today. But the things that she struggled with, they were far less gender based and more human.
What's interesting about Paxenarian is that it did not have a romantic subplot.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
first time I'd seen that, it was awesome.
Like sad, because I feel like romance is relatable to men and women.
Oh, for sure.
But I find Paxenarian being cited a lot as like being really great fantasy because it didn't go into that like mushy gushy romance stuff.
Oh yeah, no, I don't think it's good because it avoided that stuff. I liked that it avoided it because I had never seen a woman as I'd seen lots of men as the main character where there was no romantic subplot. I'd never seen a woman where there was no romantic subplot. And I actually aped that in Nightblade. Lauren does in later books have a romantic subplot. In fact, she got a couple of them, but I specifically wanted that not to be there in the first few books because I had appreciated that so much in Paxenarian. And I have readers go, oh my gosh, like I'm okay that she, that eventually that developed, but I'm so glad that right off the bat, it wasn't about her connection to some dude,
Yeah.
Or girl.
Like that. Yeah. I think there's also like that in her Harris Serrano series, that's sci-fi, Elizabeth Moons. But
yeah. She did Serrano's Legacy?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was wondering because I really liked Serrano.
Yeah, Harris Serrano was the first book. I think Serrano Legacy was a series title. But I also think about, because like now with indie publishing, we can kind of write whatever we want.
Yeah.
So if you want to write like super romantic fantasy, you can. But I kind of wonder if there was any sort of pressure back then because fantasy was so male dominated, whether female authors felt like you couldn't be taken seriously unless you didn't write romance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
For another awesome, it's not, I don't know if it's female, women led, but a woman author and woman main character. There's three main characters. Catherine Kerr's Daggerspell / Dark Spells series. It's so good. It's so good. What is it called? Devery? The Devery?
Devery.
Yeah. Anyway, highly recommend that one. That's my other favorite. I went on a whole kick of going back and looking for women authors and women main characters.
His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik, I think it is.
Which one?
His Majesty's Dragon, Temeraire.
Looking it up right now.
Nobody's read Temeraire.
No. And then not a woman main character, but an awesome woman author with an awesome series, Riddlemaster of Head by Patricia McKillop. Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Gorgeous prose. I don't know if you've taken a close look, but like that is model prose.
Yeah. It's fantastic. It's so good. That one is one of those ones where, okay, so like my dad gave me Lord of the Rings when I was 11, and I've read it once a year since then, and the copy that he gave me is still sitting on the desk on my shelves behind me. But the Riddle Master of Head might be a better book. It's never going to be my favorite book because there's too much nostalgia. There's too many experiences with my dad tied up in the Lord of the Rings. So it's the difference between best and favorite. But you read Riddle Master of Head, and it's hard to say that I've read a better fantasy novel than that one. It's really good.
What else you got?
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, I would have to add Jordan Rivet's Steel and Fire series. She's an indie fantasy author, and it's a fantasy romance, which I normally don't do, as I don't like the mush and all that, and I'm sorry for anyone who does, but I have to have action. I have to have action, and there's only a few that I can actually do that have romance in it. And I read Miranda's The Winter's Wren, and whenever I see like fantasy romance, I'm like, I don't know, but I'll try. And then I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. I'm like, yes, that is how you do it.
Thank you.
Very cool. You know, probably one of the most classic in my line of writing is Selena Sardothian from Throne of Glass. Now, I've hesitated to read that one because, number one, it's young adult character, and having read The Hunger Games and Divergent and some of those other ones, the female gaze is very, very, very strong. And which, for me, as a male reader, had a harder time connecting to those aspects of the characters. There was a lot about those series that I really liked. I've heard that the Throne of Glass series is very similar. Am I wrong in that?
Throne of Glass is fantastic. I will say that it is one of the first YA books that I ever read series. I actually haven't finished it. The newest book, Kingdom of Ash, came out September, October, something like that, and I haven't taken the time to read it. But as Angel mentioned earlier, my main character is basically modeled after Selena in a lot of different ways, primarily because she was one of my favorite characters that I've ever read about.
Interesting. Now I've got a question for you, author types. Do you approach writing your female characters different than your male characters, or is the process exactly the same?
No. I wrote it. I actually made a video on my YouTube channel about this. Whatever I'm writing, whether it's a woman or somebody who doesn't share my sexuality or race or disability, I approach them the same. I do research into things that are necessarily different, but what I try to avoid is I don't make the story about women's issues or racial issues, sexuality issues, because I feel like that's not necessarily my place. Which people are free to write what they want. I just don't want to. So I just have the character be who they are and then put them through, whatever narrative I was interested in telling, which is just usually adventure, action, primal human concerns that we can all relate to. So, I have three series so far in the world of Underrealm. One male main character and two women. And either one of them could be the other gender, and the story wouldn't functionally change very much because it's not about women's issues. Because actually, in the world, there isn't a tremendous gender difference. There isn't assigned roles and different people are supposed to do different things. Like King is a gender neutral title, and the current High King of Underrealm is a woman because that and her husband is the Queen. That's just sort of how, which always makes people giggle when they read it for the first time. But there you go. So that's the way that I choose to approach it, just because I wanted to be inclusive, but not take stories away from people, if that makes sense.
I agree with you, Garrett. I'm pretty much a lot of the same way whenever I write. I tend to avoid topics that I can't speak about, and everything today in publishing is all about wanting to cover these hot topics or these hot button issues. And I feel like a lot of the times you can get yourself into trouble with that. It's more in traditional than it is in the indie realm. But if you were following about a month ago, the book Blood Air was pulled from its publication schedule because of massive explosions of hate coming against it and things like that. And it's those type of things that I want to try to avoid. I don't want to stir up anger or make people upset. I want to write good, fun, enjoyable fantasy that's a release and an escape, not something that's going to stress people out.
Very well said. Now, flipping the script to the ladies, do you, obviously you're much more intimately familiar with the female characters. Do you have to do a little bit of research? Do you have to dig a little bit into writing the male characters, or do you just know us so well that you've just got it?
Research, not research. I don't think so. I think I also approach writing a male and writing a female in the same way. I maybe have to go back and watch my language or the way that I have them act in the scenes, but basically you could switch the gender roles and the story would be the same.
Like Dorothy, I approach them the same way. So male or female, they kind of go through the same characterization process. But with the male characters, I do aim for authenticity. Well, I aim for authenticity with both, but I need to check it more with the male characters. So sometimes I'll have my husband read over certain scenes and be like, does this sound right to you? And as far as like whether they're different, I think it's more of like a plot difference or character arc difference where I'll have certain gender related struggles, like for example, women between like motherhood and pursuing a career or trying to have both, or how much of your own dreams do you sacrifice for a relationship, or do you look for a partner who helps you achieve your goals? So those kinds of things.
Interesting. Now, do you ever, for all of you authors, it is definitely one of the hottest contested issues, but there is evidence, there is belief, there are theories that the psychology of men and women are fairly different in many aspects. Do you ever take that sort of thing into account when creating your characters, whether it's the difference in levels between a hormone which raises aggression versus estrogen, or the experiences that women have being raised with strong male and female role models versus men's experience being raised with strong male and female role models? Do you ever think about that, or is it just something subconscious, or it's not something at all that you put in your books?
It's something I thought about when I created the world. So I think that most of the studies that I have seen that seem to be good, backed by good science and well peer reviewed, seem to indicate that when those things exist, they are not uninfluenced by biology, but are primarily social. And in societies that are less socially, what do you call it? Dichotomous when it comes to gender. That's probably not the right word, but that's why I have editors, because I can't make this stuff up as I go. But and so that is why, as I mentioned before, I created a world where that stuff just doesn't exist in the first place. And it's not, Underrealm's not a society that overcame gender discrimination or anything like that. Just nobody ever thought any other way from the beginning. Yes, there are differences in terms of like overall trends, maybe of body shape and size, but that's about it. And nobody thinks that it's different. So taking those issues sort of out of the framework is my way of imagining where we could maybe get to one day, where if there, the saying that gender is a construct, and it is, but it isn't, but it is really. And so we could get to the point where it is more a construct that is, in terms of society and how society views it, that can sort of be done away with. And then we can just be dealing with, like how do these bodies actually work, and how do, these brains actually work, and why doesn't my brain work sometimes, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Rob, what about you? What's your approach to that?
Hang on, what was the question again? Sorry.
if you think about how, like, you take into account the fact that there are or could be biological and psychological differences between men and women,
I don't think I've ever really sort of considered that in my writing. Honestly, it's one of those things where I'd leave that to someone more intelligent to figure out and put into their writing. I wouldn't feel qualified enough to tackle that particular issue because I think I'd probably just get it wrong. No, that's not something I've ever consciously tried to put into my writing personally. Yeah.
Interesting. I like to think those things. For people who've listened to the Fantasy Fiends podcast for more than a couple episodes, we often get into the nature versus nurture argument, or the way that psychology and neurology and biology and all that sort of affects us. And so it's always an interesting experiment for me. And it is hard to find that balance. So I do a lot of research for all of my characters, men and women. But I think I do tend to approach women more carefully just because I'm not a woman. So I want to make sure that I portray them accurately. So I make sure to talk with women. And I've run scenes by female authors and then my wife and other people who are just readers, so that I can get as clear an idea as possible. But I think it's the same thing for me. I do try to approach the female character building the same way as I approach the man. My guys have their buttload of psychological back issues. My women have their buttload of psychological back issues, and everyone's got this fun thing going on together.
I think possibly good general advice, I hope it is anyway, on dealing with issues like that is do as much research as you possibly can. Like you said, think about it as much as you possibly can, and then retreat back to the ground that you're sure on. Because the farther that you go in terms of experiencing things that you don't know 100% about, the more you expand the things that you are certain on. Like, don't go way out into ideas about, for example, nature versus nurture, and then hit on like some idea and be like, I'm going to put that in my book. Like, the more that you think about these things and the more that you study them and the more that you talk with people about their different experiences, the more common experience you're going to get with a bunch of people. And if you talk to 100 people and they say, between them, they say 30 different things about their experience with gender, but 95% of them say this one thing, then you're pretty sure about that one thing. So take the thing that 95 people said rather than the thing that, like a couple of people over in that section, said this one thing. Don't go tossing that into your book necessarily. Experience as much as you possibly can, study as broadly and as many different viewpoints as you possibly can, and then find those common things, because that's the one that's most likely to resonate with most people anyway.
Very true. All right, so now the last question of the podcast: who is your favorite female character? Not into something that you've written.
Oh man,
in any. Let's go with books and comic books. We'll stay away from movies and TV shows because that opens things up too big.
I think I'd have to go with Phaedra from the Cushell's Legacy series. She is just such a unique character. She has this sort of understated strength where she can perform like spy activities and sort of like rein in her feelings or let them free as she chooses. That's probably she's my favorite of all time.
Mine is a little bit more of a YA, and it's not really fantasy. It's more, I don't know the exact genre. You would say science fiction fantasy. Is Cinder from the Cinder series. It's called the Cinder series. I'm not even sure, but I really liked her character. She's very determined to get things done.
Very cool.
I'll go with Tolkien's Luthien, at least until Amazon puts her in a bad TV series and ruins her for me forever.
I don't know if I've got a favorite of all time, but a favorite of mine recently was definitely the character Miko in Devin Madsen's We Ride the Storm, because that was a character who she showed such strength and resilience from the get-go, and then throughout the story, you realise more and more that the story wasn't happening to her; she was happening to the story, and it just made her such a powerful and memorable character to me.
She literally rode the wind of the story.
Yeah.
Nice. Trevor, what about you?
Well, I already mentioned Selena Sardothian from the Throne of Glass series, and that's definitely still like I was thinking and racking my brain. What's one that I can pick that's not that? What's one that I can pick that's not that? And it kept coming back to that.
Yeah.
You can pick her.
I feel that it's really cliche, especially in the YA fantasy group, and Angel and Dorothy are laughing because they know everything that's been going on in the YA fantasy group, and everybody talks about Throne of Glass like constantly. And so, but if I have to pick one that's not, here's one from a book that I read recently, Warrior of the Wild by Tricia Levenseller. The main character's name is Rosmira, and this is a standalone book. Just came out like a week or two ago, and she has a lot of things thrust on her that are out of her control. As a matter of fact, this book has the biggest time that I've ever wanted to throw a book in my life. This moment that was just so unbelievably cruel that I felt, in my opinion, that it trumped anything Dolores Umbridge ever did to Harry Potter. And that happened in this book, and I was like, what in the world? Yet she takes it and she makes it, and she does the whole lemons to lemonade sort of thing. And I really, really liked how Rosmira worked in that book. And I don't get to know her a lot because it's a standalone, so there's no series that I can take with it further. But I really did enjoy her character in that book.
Very cool. And I guess for me, I mean, I mentioned Paxton Arian just because she was such a strong character in terms of, number one, physicality, but also her temperament. But the one that still gets me to this day is Irene Adler. You never see her for real in any of the Sherlock Holmes novels, but the fact that she is almost superior to Sherlock Holmes in terms of intellect and cunning, which is what Sherlock Holmes is, his whole thing. That's what it's all about. The fact that there's this woman there that beats him at his own game. I love that. I always wanted more Irene Adler stories in the Sherlock Holmes collections.
I'd still go with Selena. I'm sorry. It's cliche, whatever. Everyone says it, but I'm sorry.
Good choice.
That's totally fine. Well, we are out of time, so why don't you guys all go around and say where readers can go check out your badass heroines, starting with Dorothy.
You can go to my website, dorothydreyer.com. Simple as that.
Awesome. Garrett, what about you? He's on mute and he doesn't know it.
I know. I got it.
There he is.
You surprised me. You can go find all of the works of Underrealm at underrealm.net. And if you want to go right to the books, it's underrealm.net/books.
Very cool. Miranda. I don't know what happened.
I think she's muted or we lost her audio.
Sorry, I had to mute that. You can find me on mirandahonfleur.com or in our Facebook group, Romantic Fantasy Shelf.
Very cool. And Rob?
Yeah, you can find me at robjhayes.co.uk. Probably the best place, yeah.
Very cool. And Trevor?
tlbranson.com, TL Branson Books on Facebook. A lot of people reach out to me on my Facebook page. And then, of course, as always, I hang out in the Indie Fantasy Addicts and YA Fantasy Addicts Facebook group, so you can always talk to me there.
Very cool. And Angel, where can people find you?
Angelhaze.com. I don't have a badass heroine in the first little short story, but they're coming.
That's good. I bet they're going to be awesome. Well, that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me. Awesome authors.
Absolutely. It's been a blast.
It was fun.
Thanks for having us.
We'll have to get you guys all back on later on in the year. For those of you who are tuning in now, stay tuned because tomorrow night we've got Josiah Bancroft coming on to talk about something. Oh, right. The divides. We were getting into the divides in categories and how it leads to the divide in people and social and religious and political divides. It's going to be an awesome discussion. We'll be on tomorrow night at 5:30 Pacific time. Stay tuned. Stevie's not here, so I will say it. Please smash the like and follow button. He always says smash. I don't get it. But anyways, hit the like and follow button. Thank you guys for watching. See you tomorrow night. Goodbye.